Good morning from my side. Really lovely to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for this invitation, and also thank already all the participants for a very healthy discussion that happened around these presentations before me. So really pleased to be in this kind of environment. So my presentation is on European forests and the European forest policy around it. But before we get into that, a few words about the organization I work for and myself. So Fern is an NGO that is dedicated to forest protection, but also to protect the people that depend on them. And we are based in Brussels, but also in UK and France. We have small offices, and it's a small organization, maybe not that well known among the public because of the specific topics, and also not having a lot of effort on having a public face, and it has been active since 1995. And myself, I'm Siim Kuresoo. I understood the Slovenian introduction that you also mentioned. I previously worked for the Estonian NGO and started a role as a European forest campaigner this year in May. So I'm a little bit new to all these topics, and I hope you forgive me if I don't have all the answers you may have. But today I'm going to talk about three things, a bird eye view or helicopter view, as you wish, on the state of European forest. And then talk a little bit about how European policies address the issues concerning European forests and what has been brought forward under this European Green Deal, and how this has an impact on European forest. And I will end with going a bit deeper on two of these initiatives, one being nature restoration law. What does this mean for European forest? And also a very new proposal by the Commission on forest monitoring. So let's get started. Maybe the first thing what we need to recognize about the European forest is that Europe is a continent of degraded forest. We have a picture here that shows us the forest integrity index. It's an index that combines connectivity with some of the ecological features, and the green showing high integrity, meaning that ecologically well-functioning forests are well connected, and the brown would be low integrity. And Europe, although having fair proportion of forest, European forests are degraded. We have lost 97% of our old growth over the time. Habitat Directive reporting shows us that the species that were meant to be protected or have a special care in Europe, only a small percentage of them are in a favorable state. And the same goes for the forest habitats on the Habitat Directive measures. and 70% of European forests are even-aged, and this indicates that the clear-cut-based or rotational forestry is the dominating way to manage European forests. There has been an argument that Europe has gained forest lately, in late decades. And this is true when you look at the forest area of Europe. We have gained a little bit of forest, or not little bit, but fair amount of forest. But at the same time, our forests are getting younger, and there was a recent study that quantified loss of high forests in Europe over last 20 years, and this really showed the picture from the ecological perspective. The really old forests we are losing in a big scale. I think the finding was that more than 2 million hectares of high forest has been lost in last 2 decades. This is, I don't know even how this compares to the total territory of Slovenia, but it's about the size of Slovenia, more or less. And this is particularly a problem in the northern countries, Sweden, Finland, and the Baltic states. We have some of this happening also in this region and some in Germany. And it's explained by different factors, but still more than 80% is logging of these forests, and we can argue there are other factors like pests or fires that actually bring about the logging, but this is the picture we see. Then on the climate front, European forests are less of a sink than they used to be. And again, higher logging intensity contributes to that. We remove more wood from the forest, and therefore the forest sink is declining. And just few photos to illustrate. We have less of what we have on the right side, really old forest species, and more of clear cuts in Europe these days. So many would argue that this is also because we need to support the rural economies by having intensive forestry. But the matter in this front is that also the jobs are going down in the forest sector. So in 15 years, according to the Forest Europe, there are 700,000 people working less on the forestry throughout Europe than there used to be in the change of millennia. And we do have citizens that are concerned who don't accept the forestry model that prevails in most of the countries. The right photo comes from the Białowieży forest in Poland, where there has been an ongoing protests and different actions by the state forest and activists. The left side photo is from last week, where French activists stopped the presidential convoy that was on the way to see a monoculture project and somehow endorse this kind of forestry. So there is a fair amount of concern over European forest for a good reason. And especially because European Union as such has set high ambitions and targets in the fight against the climate change, but also biodiversity loss. And these tendencies we see in the forest, we can't really ignore. So, but then we go to the European response. So the first big thing that has some relevance in forestry space from the very recent EU policy space is climate law. And the climate law is a kind of file that determines the climate goals for Europe, and when doing that, it also sets a target for the land sink. And land sink, then forestry plays a very important part of that. And since the climate law is in place, EU has set a target for how it wants to see its land to act, and therefore it cannot be ignored when deciding over forestry as well. Then European Green Deal, it's something people talk about a lot. It's not like necessarily a regulation that needs to be followed. There is no accountability for breaking the deal, rather than this being a very general mandate that this acting commission got from the member states and the parliament to really come forward with all kind of regulations that they have ever since have done. There is another fairly general policy file called biodiversity strategy that also sets fairly clear targets, but doesn't necessarily create the mechanisms to achieve these targets. One of them being the aim to protect 30% of European ecosystems, or 30% of land and seas. It's worded, while 10% is expected to be strictly protected and 20% managed in a way that is in line with the aim to maintain the habitats. And the EU has a forest strategy. This is somehow pulling together different policy aims in forestry. So this document talks about forest management as well as forest protection and restoration, and also the use of timber products. But then the second slide is more full of regulations that actually do have very concrete outcomes. The first one I listed was deforestation regulation that we had a long presentation about, and I would not go into details, but maybe to add to Kaja what I heard from her presentation, it was all about imports, but the law actually, or the regulation actually talks about placing products to EU market. This meaning also the EU countries themselves can't violate the rules and definitions they've set up. And this has implications on turning natural forests into planted forests or plantations. So it's also important to keep in mind that it regulates European forest. LULUCF regulation, I don't know how heavily this is talked about in Slovenian forestry debates, but this is another finished piece of regulation that has strong implications to forestry. And it sets national targets that for some countries are fairly challenging without changing the forest practices. Nature restoration law, this is a file I will go a bit deeper later on. Then there are two regulations that deal with consumption end of forestry, and one of them being Renewable Energy Directive. This is not a new directive, but it got reviewed. And one topic that was heavily debated was the use of wood for biomass. And it ended by adding a little bit to the previous ones in sustainability criteria. But this is by far not the favored or wanted outcome for many NGOs who would argue that it still stimulates logging for energy, and this is not good for climate and also not for the forest. Another file that is not yet finalized is a packaging regulation, and there has been also a lot of discussion from the perspective of forest, because again, packaging rules can actually stimulate wood use, and for many NGOs, this is not the wanted outcome. We don't want to have regulatory stimulation for using wood products in this way, as alternatives do exist and are available. Then another file that is not yet finalized, it's still to be done so very soon, is carbon removal certificates framework. It's, among other things, it talks about how forest could be used for creating carbon credits, and these discussions are not yet finalized. From Fern perspective, we are not very happy with the approach where forests are dealt with only one function in mind, and therefore we don't support carbon credits and the sale of creating a market for carbon credits, because it forgets about all the other functions that forests could have, and therefore has an impact on the forest management. But the way things are going, maybe there is some precaution also in this regulation that should help us. And then the latest new file is forest monitoring law. Just a few weeks ago, the Commission put out the proposal for forest monitoring in Europe. So, quickly on nature restoration law, that is not finalized, but is very close to be finalized. And the aim of this law has been that the EU really seriously sets up a path for restoring its ecosystems, and it has many different aims. What I wanted to drag your attention to is the Article 10 in this regulation that asks member states or forces member states to monitor and set benchmarks to specific ecological features in the forest, and then as the time passes also to ensure that these features follow a positive trend, a wanted trend. And these would be common forest birds, deadwood, standing and lying, then share of uneven structured forests, connectivity, carbon, native species coverage, and the diversity of tree species. And what's important to notice is that this talks about all the forests, not only forests in Natura 2000 or protected, but this is all Slovenian forest, all Belgian forest, all Finnish forests. And we are quite pleased with this approach because this brings us closer to this multifunctionality aspect of things. So we don't separate the forest that much, and we have a good understanding of what the true sparring would mean. Then quickly on forest monitoring law, this was only brought out a few weeks ago, and it's a bit unclear whether this commission and this parliament that will end fairly soon, if they have time to finalize it or not. But what we find opportunities in that would be that it's a place where all these obligations that come from different regulations can be dealt together with, and where the accountability platform starts from. But it can also inform future policies for EU, but also nationally. One element there is member states needing to do strategic planning, taking into account all the different indicators, not only from the environmental space, but also from the social and the economical space. And I know many countries actually do, many still don't. Until now, the proposal says it's a voluntary exercise for countries. It would be good if it was mandatory. It would add accountability between countries as well. And with that note, we can think of what the future will hold for European forest and EU regulation. One big question is how will be the new set of rules be implemented. The second big question that has been unanswered is how could be this transition to close to nature forest management be funded. There is, and it has two sides of things. One being that there are both EU subsidies and a lot of national subsidies that until now go to very bad forest practices. And this needs to be stopped. But at the same time, it would be even nicer if these funds went for restoration and close to nature forest management. And the third big question is, it's already building up for new goals and aims for 2040 targets, and how forest will be dealt with in that space. It's a question that needs an answer and will need it fairly soon because the discussions are already happening. So thank you.